Hi everyone, welcome back to Coaches on the Couch. I'm Rachel Birchmore and I'm flying solo today. You'll hear Louise a little bit later on, but I'm really pleased to be joined by architect and design director Andy Puncher from Distill. Am I pronouncing that right, Andy?
You are, yes,
Distill?
that's great. Yeah.
That's a good start then. How are you?
Very good, thank you. How are you?
It's good. Yeah, really good. Thanks for coming on. This
Pleasure.
all
Thank you for
stemmed
asking me.
from a little chat at the recent Orm's 40th party, which was great. So I'm glad. Yeah, thank you for coming on. So before we get into introductions and the theme for today, important stuff, please tell us, you're actually sitting on your couch. So please tell us something brief and interesting about your couch.
Yeah, my wife Helen is an upholsterer, so our house is completely swamped with mid-century furniture that she's rescued along the way. And our couch was actually something that she found when she was training. So she upholstered it as a sort of practice piece during her training, and there it stayed for years until she found out I was coming on this podcast.
Oh,
So at
really?
which point, the couch last week was completely reupholstered. So yeah, entirely for
Wow.
your benefit. So yeah, I don't know whether that's the first for coaches on the couch, but
It pretty much is. Yeah, I don't know whether to believe you or
it's
not.
all
Wow.
true, all true.
Wow. Well, we are honoured.
Yeah.
Uh, Brilliant. Well, I mean, I don't know how to follow that. You obviously you obviously wear a lot of hats, Andy, these days. So rather than me introduce you, I'm going to, because of its complexity, it would be really great to hear from you about what you're doing these days, the different roles.
Yeah, so I think as we discussed, I think for 18 years I ran an architecture practice called PH Plus, which I closed in sort of July 2023. At which point I was very keen to explore other things where perhaps I could have a little bit more, I don't know, control or influence in actually how I thought projects should develop. And so I looked to move client side, which I now have. I guess I'm a consulting design director, although I hate the word
Okay.
consulting
Mm,
because for me it's really important that I'm completely embedded into the organizations that I work
mm,
with. I completely understand where they're coming from. And what I try to do is to, I guess, use my experience to deliver, I guess, social, contextual alongside commercial value, because that's really important to allow this to happen with sort of like-minded developers and investors. So I guess at the moment I'm working predominantly with three companies. I work with Lateral, who are science and technology focused developers. I work with Fabrics, and particularly in a fund which looks to explore sort of new forms of living, so shared living, PBSA, build to rent, which again, both those companies, are very much in tune with, I guess, where the markets are at the moment. But I also work directly with an investor called Solido Capital, who are Australian based, and so I help like slightly invest their fund and sort of manage the sort of the design stages of that fund in the UK. So I guess looking more in depth at what I do with those people, I guess it starts with site appraisals, looking at viability of projects, developing sort of narratives, which then become, very simple capacity feasibility studies, which we then sort of begin to work into briefs. And I think that's a
mm.
fairly major part of what I do. So I begin to write the briefs, which we then go use to appoint, really talented external design teams. And then I work with those design teams, I guess, from the client side to develop projects to, try to maximize their potential for all parties through to the sort of planning stages where the
Great.
equivalent of me then takes them on. So
Great.
that's sort of what I'm working on at the moment, really.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, I can imagine you're quite busy. It's a sort of similar role, but into three quite different organizations. And it's interesting actually that you said you don't like that word consulting, because it made me think of people are using that fractional term, aren't they, these days, around certainly around marketing and
Yeah.
finance director. I mean, is that a more comfortable term, or is that even worse than
I
consulting?
think I think it still sounds dislocated. I mean, I think
Yeah.
when I closed PH Plus, I really wanted a full-time job. That's what I wanted.
Right.
And I wanted the security of that. And but I was also very conscious that I think one of the reasons that maybe PH Plus was so successful for so long and then wasn't successful is that it was very much focused on developing bespoke architecture and an architecture which I mean, potentially was more expensive to build, but would deliver much more commercial and placemaking value. So as a result, it had a very good. I had 100% planning success rate. It was delivering some really exciting places, and again, they were in a hot market. The
Mm.
the returns would always be greater than the build cost. I think what's happened in architecture, perhaps more recently, is that balance has shifted. And I think the investors are very nervous. And so what we've ended up with is more of a sort of formulaic spreadsheet based briefing, certainly briefing and architectural response to some extent. And that's meant is that architects are increasingly being asked to reduce their fees, their scope is being eroded. I feel that that's actually to the detriment of the places that we're actually able to create, because effectively they're not able to put the time or the thought in, and clients are worried about
Mm.
something that hasn't been done before.
Mm.
So I knew that I didn't want to go back into that spiral. And, so what I wanted to do was to begin to form a or work out a role where I could influence the opposite and perhaps start to, as I say, influence more what's happening.
Yeah, so great introduction, Andy. You're obviously, as I say, you're obviously quite busy. So, I mean, the theme for today, these conversations always cover a lot of ground. I don't know exactly what you're going to say, so we can flow a little bit with that. But we always have a central theme, and today that theme is reinvention, or that's what I'm calling it. We'll come on to how you how you see it in a minute. But reinvention, and given the level of uncertainty in the world at the moment, it seems like quite a good one to unpack and see what advice maybe we can create between us for leaders to develop skills for themselves, but also how they might support their teams trying to do the same. So you've obviously told us a little bit about what you're doing now. You've talked a little bit about PH Plus and the decision to close. I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit more about that decision, but then those early moments of reinvention.
Yeah. So as I think I just discovered, it felt like the sort of architectural world, which PH Plus had been so successful in, was changing dramatically. And whereas we were looking at this more bespoke architecture, which generated more returns and more, I guess, in my mind, better places, was being sort of given less importance, I think.
Yeah.
And so what I wanted to do then was to move more into the sort of the client side world. And what I had to do was really sort of understand where my strengths
Mm.
were in doing that, I guess, and where the sort of uniqueness was for me in that world. I think the clients that we'd been working with at PH Plus were often sort of smaller developers, and as a result, I was more connected to the investment behind them in terms of day-to-day reporting, understanding where their specific requirements were. So I guess slightly moving towards a more development manager role. And so that gave me a really interesting cross breadth of sort of knowledge. And I think for me, it was sort of understanding whether there was a role for that. And so I started off by going out to meet some developers that I knew had similar aspirations to deliver, really high quality placemaking. And it started with some lunches. And I think, as I mentioned, I was kind of hoping that someone would offer me a full-time job, because I
Mm.
think it's been interesting listening to some of your pods with Christoph Egray and
Mm.
Harry Phillips. And I guess I was in a slightly different place, particularly to Christoph, because I was 46. I had a mortgage, I had kids,
Mm.
and so I needed an income. So I sort of started off with this sort of trial period with sort of one or two of them, and then that has grown as that's become to be seen to be successful, and now I am working with them all pretty much on retainers, as well as sort of doing other stuff with quality review panels and sort of local authorities, similar sort of roles. So I
Mm,
think for me, it was about identifying exactly where I wanted to be, what I wanted to do, and then there was no role out there on any of the job sites for it, so I sort of had to slightly instigate it.
mm. There's those sort of intersect, I can't remember what it's called now, is it Ikigai or something like that? But it's the
Okay.
intersecting circles between what you love doing, what you can get paid for doing, all of those sorts of things coinciding with the side of it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, I'm calling this reinvention. It could be adaptability, which is another skill which is similar, which is very much needed in uncertain times. How do you describe it?
I think it's more of an evolution for me. And I was asked to write a piece for the AJ, and I guess I referenced moving from an actor role perhaps to more of a director role. Other people have described it as, moving from a player manager to manager in a
Right.
football terminology.
Yeah.
But it's for me, it was a very natural thing. I think, I work with so many great people at PH Plus, and I guess the director role is pretty similar. I
Yes.
to maybe do it on a wider sphere now with a whole wider range of, fantastic design teams and architects, and it's a real privilege to be
Mm.
able to work. And as I said, with a sort of remit from developers and investors who sort of understand the value of what it can deliver.
I'm wondering the sense of ownership or that sort of being embedded within three organizations, how does that differ from doing the same but on a project scale?
I think that the organizations I have chosen, they all have a very specific MO, I guess. And I think what's interesting in that MO is it has a sort of a line, a golden thread, I guess, that runs through all of their projects. So I think what's interesting is each project begins to inform the next one. And so I think on a project by project basis, this role could certainly work, but I think it's more valuable to let's see it as a sort of sequence of
Yeah.
projects. And I
Yeah.
think what's interesting is I'm now not only writing briefs for individual projects, but I'm also writing playbooks for what their investor requirements are. And almost we can work out what the rules we're having to work to with the design teams, and then we can really play on those rules.
Yeah.
And I think that comes out. I mean, it's all three of them I've now been working with directly for 18 months. And, it feels that sort of those synergies are getting stronger
Mm.
as we've sort of moved through the
Yeah.
project.
So this is, I mean, you said earlier that you spent some time sort of identifying your strengths. It sounds like values also came into that. And then the
Definitely.
values, yeah, being similar through the organizations that you've selected to work with.
Yeah, and what's interesting is actually being able to put those three organizations together, which
Mm.
is again starting to happen. So because I've deliberately chosen non-competes, their
Yes.
their their skill sets actually work incredibly well together.
Mm.
And so whether it's, a sort of more mixed use campus scale projects, it's also helpful obviously to be working directly with an investor. Because again, they can begin to unlock a lot of this stuff, but
Yes.
their values um, are pretty aligned, which
Mm.
is really helpful.
That's great. Were there any moments of doubt along the way? Any obstacles that you needed to overcome?
I think there was a major moment of doubt on that first day when I'd closed PH Plus and thought, well, am I actually employable? You become so specific as you move through your career, I guess, into what you're doing, and then um, I guess this shift into something that was familiar, but I wasn't familiar within those organisations for those sorts of roles. I think that was a major doubt. I mean, when particularly with lateral, I guess, moving into a science and technology field, having to learn very, very quickly what the
Mm.
sort of
Because that was
the
new,
rules
presumably, was it? That wasn't a
completely new to
sector
me.
for PH Plus. Yeah.
No, no. So I spent a lot of time sort of trying to get up to speed. Again, I'm very fortunate with the organizations I work with because they have some really great people doing you know, it's not the same role at all. We're all very different, but we
Mm.
work well. Yeah, it's sort of working out that you're part of a team that's delivering this and really sort of working together, and that's been a really positive thing. Sort of
So
moving.
what was the first move when you felt that moment of flipping heck, am I actually employable here? And then you took what was the first step that you took that sort of got you on your way to overcoming that?
I wrote down what I thought I could offer, the clients that I
Yeah.
had identified. And so I prepared my pitch, I booked the table, I went and sat down and I said, right, this is what I want to do. Is this something that we could explore together? And,
Mm.
it was, I think all of them all said, yeah, that sounds really great. We don't really know how it will work. And I think there were concerns about, I guess, particularly architects, how they would feel about me
Mm.
coming on board onto existing projects, existing relationships. I didn't
Yeah.
want to be seen as some sort of, I don't know, reaper or something that's going to come in and
Mm.
criticize. But actually, as it worked out, I think not being connected directly to a competing practice, which I know a lot of people in, particularly in quality review panels and things are, I think that really helped. And
Yeah.
it soon became apparent that I could almost work as a translator to between the client and the architect. And actually, it became a much more connected relationship between the two because they had somebody who could speak for both of them
Yeah.
and sort of dig
Okay.
into
Yeah. Showing yourself as helpful. And
yeah.
yeah, no, I can see that with the interpreter. So, I mean, clarity is one of the things that seems to come through from that. And I've written down start by starting.
Yes,
It was
it's
almost,
good.
yeah, there was a moment of doubt, but it sounds fairly fleeting.
It was
And
fleeting,
yeah,
yeah. I mean, there was a couple of job offers that came in when the sort of news broke from fairly large organizations who wanted me to go back into leading
right.
architecture practices. But I knew, it was a fairly traumatic thing to close something that you thought was going to last you
Yes.
the rest of your life, and
Yeah.
also was your identity to some extent. I mean, it's
Mm.
interesting that as a thought, but B, I knew that I'd started this thing, and I was really excited to see where it could go.
So almost knowing with the job offers there was almost a sort of plan B, as it were, wasn't it? So clarity over plan A, but you could feel there was something else there as well, wasn't there?
There was, but there was always the
Yeah.
fear that someone will work out that I can't draw in CAD in 3D, which is a really it's a people in the developer offices I work in think that's hilarious. So that was always the big concern that somebody would.
Really. Brilliant. What have you learned about yourself through this process? I mean, how
uh,
long's it been now? Is it 18 months?
18 months
A
nearly,
year?
yeah, I think
Yeah.
so.
So what have you learned over the last 18 months about yourself?
Um, that's a really difficult question. Um, I think I've learned that I guess I need to have more conviction because again, that am I employable? And I
Mm.
think, you know, I think more conviction in a uniqueness of skill set, not trying to fit into, a job role that's advertised on, I don't know, Dezeen or Reba or whatever, because I didn't fit into any of those categories. I don't have the technical sort of focus that would mean I could go and do this role, on sort of delivery side stuff. You know, uh, I didn't want to go back into sort of, and it would have been large scale architecture practice. So I think just having that conviction that, you can actually find a route, and again, through almost becoming a specialist, but it doesn't have to fit into boxes. And I think
Mm.
that's been a really positive thing for me to
Mm.
learn.
Yeah. And because you're carving it out for yourself, aren't you? So it's a more proactive approach rather than responding to the job specs, as it were, that seem to be out there.
I agree.
Yeah. So, I mean, that sounds like fairly good advice to other people thinking about a similar transition. But what other just we're coming into needing to wrap up with our time today, but what other advice would you offer people looking at their own career transitions?
Um, it's interesting because again, I think it probably comes back to this idea that an architect is a generalist, and I think they celebrate being generalists. And I certainly know when I was at Hawkins Brown and we did a business link process very early in Hawkins Brown's sort of development of the company, and they said,
Mm,
"Well, what's your specialism? What are you experts at?" And we were like, "Well, design." And actually, it's too general. So then
mm,
we said mixed use, and again, the feedback was it's too general. And I think it's identifying that specialism, that uniqueness. Um, and I think that's true for any architect who comes to pitch for projects with me. We're not necessarily looking for somebody who's done life science before or has done co-living before or has done it, but somebody who brings something that is special and unique, and what value can that add rather than what cost could you cut. And I think that's a
mm.
fairly specific
Okay,
thing that
yeah.
works for.
So knowing something about the business the whichever of the businesses it is that you represent and have embedded yourself within, knowing a bit about that and therefore the skill set that they're bringing.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's useful because that's good advice for people individually, but also people who might want to pitch themselves to you in one of your roles, which I
Yeah,
can
yeah.
imagine could be the case. Um, I'm going to wrap things up there, Andy, because as you know, Louise and I are going to have a bit of a chat before and after the sort of we'll bookend the conversation. So I just want to say thanks so much for sharing some really sound advice there for people, and it's great to see you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for asking me.
Well, hello again. Louise has now joined us, so I think we'll just start off by asking Louise. Obviously, you've heard the conversation. What stood out for you?
Well, first of all, it was a novel experience hearing a conversation of which I wasn't part.
Yeah.
Leaving that aside, I thought it was a really interesting conversation. I think my first observation was that it built on our previous podcast theme a little bit as well, because Andy talked about some of the challenges that led to him deciding to step back or stop at
Yeah.
PH Plus. And we've talked before about that decision, what a difficult one it can be when, 18 years is quite a big chunk of your professional life at his age.
Yeah,
Think,
that's
okay, I'm
right.
giving it a really good shot. And for various reasons, and that's the other theme I suppose I picked up on immediately, it wasn't working out. And that being that circumstances have changed, there have been changes in the market, the pressures on fees. And you have to admire somebody who looks at all that and says, this is not actually where my professional story ends. I think it's going to continue in a slightly different direction.
I think that's interesting. It's part of this sort of wider shift, isn't it, that we've talked about with Harry Phillips and Christoph Egray. And then, as you say, the last podcast around pay and fees and the shift in the industry and how different people are responding in different ways to that.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, going client side is a shift.
Indeed.
To take that perspective that you've had and then use that expertise. And I think Andy talked about understanding what his strengths were and I think you mentioned strengths and values, but it's also him understanding his strengths and the value that he can bring, and knowing that, carving out something, a role or three roles, in fact, for himself in response to those changes in the market, being proactive about it. It's all about being.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what struck me, the proactivity and being able to be that clear and then deliberate about the plan and the pathway that he chose to take, definitely.
Well, I think, from a coaching point of view, you and I often work with people. I think I had a conversation quite recently with somebody who seemed to have lost agency, getting back that agency and that ability to determine your own path.
Which obviously, from our point of view, that getting that sort of clarity, quite often we work with lots of people where our role is to help somebody get that clarity. I don't know if Andy did work with a coach, actually, I didn't ask him, but if he didn't, he obviously managed to find that clarity for
Yeah.
for himself.
Yeah, clarity and agency. I mean, I think if you're in the position that I'm kind of making an assumption here, but I don't think it's a reach to say that if you're in a position where your business that's been successful and you're having to look at the changes that have happened that may impact its future success, there are a lot of people that you can get paralysis in that situation, get that fight, flight, or freeze reaction. And a lot of people get a bit frozen and think, oh God, and they become a bit passive. But I think that to find that agency to create something, and as you say, the clarity to create something new is really interesting. I wonder if you did work with a coach. Andy, perhaps you'll let us know.
Yeah, brilliant. I saw this thing this morning. It was actually for something completely different, but I think you'll like it because it's your favorite acronym, VUCA or VUCA, which obviously is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And this guy, Bob Johansson, who wrote a book called Leaders Make the Future, had flipped it round so it was vision, so getting purpose, value, and strengths, understanding, so being able to reflect, clarity, which is what made me just think about this, and then agility, so thinking divergently and moving off. I thought it was quite a nice flip and kind of relevant to
it's a really nice flip because it takes 4 quite negative or potentially negative words and turns to 4 really positive, proactive ones. So I really like that flip. I think it's very pertinent to that conversation you recorded with Andy. How was it flying solo?
It's actually really difficult. Yeah, in some ways it's obviously easier to have a one-to-one conversation in some respects, but it's definitely harder to manage a conversation of a certain length because there's no edit to it. Yeah, on your own.
So we all learned something from that one then.
We all learned something.
Okay, jolly good. And we'll both be coming to a couch near you soon.
We will.
Okay, cheers.